Good morning. My name is Enrique Alvarez Casado. From Barcelona, Spain. I am the research director of the Center for Applied Ergonomics in Barcelona. But I have the honor of being part of the largest ergonomics school in the world, the UPM International Ergonomics School. I'm going to start by posing a problem. We all know that the main occupational risk factors that can lead to musculoskeletal disorders due to possible physical overexertion at work are the following. Force exerted. Postures and movements that are carried out with each body segment with localized pressures. And although to a lesser extent, exposure to vibrations and thermohygrometric environments. The extremes. But in addition to this possible labor requirement, due to occupational risk factors, the main factors are organizational. The job can be very demanding, but for how long? Exposure duration. At what pace are you working? And with what recovery periods? I want to present a small example to understand the importance of these organizational factors. Let's look at a typical work shift. 8 hours of work. Therefore 480 minutes. Within these 480 minutes we have 30 minutes dedicated to feeding. A lunch break plus 2 additional breaks of 10 minutes each. Therefore, net working time is 440 minutes. That is the duration of the exposure. Let's imagine that the person is performing a cyclical task in a food industry where they are being processed meat and the person is making some cuts of the meat. Cycle time is 8 seconds. In other words, in 1 minute it will process 7.5 units. And that if this work is done during the 440 minutes, at the end of the shift it will have processed 3,300 units. Good. With this information we can assess the risk level of the person that we have here with a medium significant risk in the right upper extremity and a low significant risk level in the left upper extremity. These levels of risk and therefore these probabilities of developing a musculoskeletal disorder in the upper extremities will be experienced by the person who performs this work for 440 minutes a day. Every day, that is, 20 days a month, for 11 months a year. Obviously, if we reduce the exposure time, for example, continue doing it every day of the year, but every day 240 minutes work fewer hours, the rest of the day does not work. Obviously we can calculate, recalculate and the risk indices will be lower. Same as if we slow down. They work all day for 420 or 440 minutes, but at a rate of 10 seconds each unit. Therefore, this slower work also reduces the risk index. Notice that these risk indices that we have calculated. We have observed a working day and we have assumed that every day, they have the same level of exposure. What happens when it isn't? The problem may be more complex. Let's imagine every week. Every day of the week is different. That is to say, Monday is different from the exhibition on Tuesday and different from that on Friday, but all the weeks of the year are the same. For example, we imagine a small company, a micro-enterprise, where on Monday they receive the materials and start production. Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday they are producing and on Fridays they pack and prepare orders. What is the risk now for people? because a day is not always repeating itself constantly throughout the year. Or what happens when the cycle is monthly. For example, a construction painter where he works 20 days, but of those 20 days, 10% is dedicated to transportation, moving around and getting to the works. 8% of the time transports materials. 10% of the time prepares surfaces for work. And then you have to clean up. Must sand. It must fill. And finally, 35% of the time paint the walls, the surfaces. And this monthly pattern is repeated throughout the year. What is the person's risk now? Or even annual cycles. For example, in agriculture we have some months of the year where we are planting, watering. Other months we are pruning and caring for the plant, and other months we are collecting, harvesting the product. And this annual cycle is repeated every year. What risk are people now? Good. Faced with this problem, I propose the solution. There is a model. The mathematical model to make the calculation is called Multitask General Exposure Index, and it can be calculated. I do not entertain myself explaining the formula. It is simply a mathematical issue. You have this article available that you can consult online for free where this model is explained. The important thing, this model that I just presented that allows us to calculate a risk index. When exposure varies, either between days of the week or between weeks or throughout the year, we can apply it to both the OCRA risk indices and the lifting indices, the variable lifting index or the lifting indices of the NAO's equation or the manual push and pull of Snooky-Plum load. That is, we can apply it to any risk index that is a function. The risk is a function of duration. Therefore, when we talk about the daily exposure level based on the minutes that are exposed during the day, we obtain a multiplier that modulates the risk index. If the risk index, we can apply this multiplier. We can apply the multi. And that allows us. Let's look at an abstract example. An example where we have 7 different tasks with OCRA indices. Therefore, risk first column is the risk in the right upper extremity. Risk in the left upper extremity. Second column. These risks are the risk index that a person would have who would spend all day doing that task throughout the year. Same for task 2, task 3, task 4. This is called intrinsic risk, and it allows us to see that there is a task where it is very demanding for the right upper extremity, but very light for the left. And another task. Other tasks that are very light for the right upper extremity, on the other hand, are demanding for the left. Good. What happens when throughout the year the person is doing a small percentage of the time of each of the tasks? Well, applying this model we can calculate it. And although we were exposed to tasks that were very demanding for the right, in this case we finally obtained a trivial or very low-level risk. Very low risk for the right upper extremity and significant risk for the left. What happens if now the person does not work every month of the year? There are months of the year when you do not have a job and therefore the risk of your exposure is reduced. Obviously, this is reflected in the final risk index that the person has, and we can calculate it, being totally acceptable. And in the case that, work every month, but the percentage of time outside varies from dedication to each of the tasks. For example, task 7 in this case, which is the lightest. He spends more time in the months of January, February and March, or October and November, and less time in the months between April and September. Well, here we can see in this graph, applying the model, what is the risk index for each month. And we see that obviously the months that you spend more time on lighter tasks, the risk is lower, and the months that you spend more time on more demanding tasks, the risk is higher for both the right and the left. And in the end, we can calculate the risk for annual exposure for both the right and the left. This is the explanation so that it is understood what is the application of this mathematical model that allows capturing that variability and those weekly, monthly and annual macrocycles. Obviously it is a rather cumbersome subject and difficult to calculate manually. For this reason I am going to present a simple tool that will help us. The simple tool is called the Ergo and PN VINCI tool, a tool developed by the UPM International Ergonomics School. Based on Excel, it will help us to apply this model. It can be freely downloaded from the internet. How does it work? Okay, so I'll explain it briefly. It works in 3 steps and we are going to see each one of them. The first step will be to calculate the intrinsic risks of each task. Second case. The second step is to define a homogeneous group and determine the duration of dedication to each of the tasks. And the third step applies the automatic mathematical models automatically to obtain the risk indices. Well, in the first case, it is necessary. In the first step, what we are going to do is calculate the intrinsic risk indexes for each of the tasks. This means that we are going to calculate the risk index as if there was someone who was doing that task for 440 minutes a day, with a break to eat more, 2 more breaks of about 8 or 10 minutes, for 20 days a month, 11 months a year. What risk would a person have to carry out a task all the time? That is the intrinsic risk, and the intrinsic risk is going to be calculated for both repetitive work in the upper extremities such as manual lifting of loads and forced postures and pushing, manual traction of load. Here we see as an example a list of tasks, and each task has been calculated what is the intrinsic risk based on the OCRA method, high precision checklist for both left and right. Additionally, some of these tasks also require manually pushing and pulling loads for those particular tasks. The intrinsic risk index based on the standard is also calculated in the ISO 11228 Part 2 method. Some of these tasks also require manual lifting of load. These tasks are also evaluated. This risk is assessed using the risk index, whether it is the composite lifting index or the variable lifting index. And the intrinsic risk index is calculated based on gender and age for each of the tasks. And finally, it is also calculated using the TACO method. The intrinsic risk indices for the head, neck, back and lower extremities. Once we have identified the tasks and calculated the intrinsic risk indices, we proceed to the next step. Step 2. It is to define and identify the homogeneous exposure group. It is a group of people who are exposed to the different risks in the same way and therefore, at the end of the work shift, at the end of the work week, at the end of the month and at the end of the year. Have each of these people had the same level of demand? They perform the same tasks, more or less at the same rate for the same time. For this homogeneous exposure group, we introduce in the tool a typical day and representative day of each month of the year. For example, if they do not work in January, we do not write anything, and in this case the same information has been written for each month of the year. It would be that they have a work shift of 420 minutes a day on average, that they take 3 breaks of at least 8 minutes and a 30-minute lunch break. They also spend 10 minutes getting into uniform, 10 minutes to carry out cleaning, order and cleanliness, and 10 minutes to reach the work position and start the work activity. Therefore, at the end of these 420 minutes, subtracting breaks and non-repetitive activities, we are left with a net repetitive work time of 360 minutes a day. That is, 86% of the shift duration. On the other hand, we write in the tool how many hours that homogeneous group has worked each month. There may be months that the same work is not done, for example, because there is no demand, because it is raining under construction and they cannot work, etc., due to breaks or illnesses. In the graph that we see, what is the distribution of hours worked each month? The percentage is automatically plotted against a constant. The constant is 160 hours per worker worked per month. When we exceed that constant, it is graphed in the red zone. Good. Let's remember that the only thing we have to write in the tool is the total number of hours worked per month by the group of people in that homogeneous group. In our example there were 10. We will write the total worked by these 10 people. What we wrote is okay when you work. What tasks do you spend your time on? Since this is often difficult to determine, it is written as a percentage of the time. We must always explain 100%. Therefore, the sum of each column must be 100% and we will explain when they are working that month what percentage of time they dedicate to each of the tasks that we had previously identified and evaluated. Once registered these percentages of time that surely the employer, or the workers themselves will help us determine. We have finished. What is this tool going to do? This tool with that information will apply the mathematical model that we have seen and it will provide us. What is the risk index for this group of people? The procedure to apply the multi-act model is that this year becomes a fictitious working day, reducing in a fictitious workday, and once we have the fictitious workday, we apply the classical models previously already proposed in the scientific calculus literature using the weighted arithmetic mean or the multi-task complex model. I want to present what is the great wonder that a group of researchers from the EPM International Ergonomics School has developed. And it is a tool that allows us to perform semi-automatic calculations, semi-automatic evaluations for construction and agriculture. This Ergo Hippie tool at VINCI tool, both for construction and agriculture. What this group of researchers has done is the following. It has taken a sector of activity, the organization of work has been studied, identifying all the tasks, the macro phases, tasks, subtasks and what are the different. Next, the calculation of all the intrinsic risk indices of all these tasks and their variance has been carried out. And therefore a library of pre-assessed tasks has been built. As conclusions, we have seen that work organization is a very important component when working conditions are not abnormal. We already have mathematical models available to determine risk from variable exposures, whether weekly, monthly or yearly. Specifically, the multi-chain model. I have presented a very simple tool, Ergo Hippie in VINCI, which allows us to apply this model in a very simple way, especially when we have the tasks pre-evaluated. And that is work that has already been done by a group of researchers from the UPM International Ergonomics School in Agriculture under construction. And therefore, only by writing the work organization we automatically obtain the risk indices. And also using this model and this tool, we can simulate in a very simple way what is the expected impact on risk reduction due to changes in working conditions. But I think this is a topic for another presentation. Thank you for your attention. And also many thanks to the IPN research team for the great work they have done.